To get started on our sand dollar coasters, we get out our G-hook and we're going to chain 4, and then we're going to work 9 DCs in the 4th chain from the hook. That first chain 3 counts as our first DC. So this will count as a stitch, and then all the DCs will count as a stitch. So we'll have 10 stitches total all the way around. So that's 2 DCs, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. So we have our 9 DCs and our chain 1, so that makes 10 total. We're going to grab that and pull it tight, and then slip stitch in the top of the chain 3. So here's our first, second, and third chain. We're going to slip stitch in that top of that first, or of that third chain, to form our circle. Now, if you're using the Lion Brand 24/7 cotton, it is kind of slippery. So on these, I like to knot the back, tail through, make a knot, and then use my finger to smoosh it flat on the work. When I pull it tight, that makes the knot press down into the work, and it not only hides the knot, but it also makes sure that the knot is right up against the work and won't allow it to open up at all. Alright, so round 2 of our sand dollar, we're going to start by chaining 2. The chain 2s will count as a DC because we want them to be short and stubby so that they hold together well. We're going to do a DC in the same stitch as the chain. So this would normally be the stitch we work into right here. But we're going to work into this stitch, the stitch at the bottom of the chain, and work a DC. Then we're going to work a front post DC around this next stitch. A front post DC is a lot like a DC, except so you're going to yarn over, but instead of putting your hook through the stitch, we're going to put it around the post of the stitch, like this. Let's see, it came through the back. We're going to yarn over and pull through, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, just like a DC. Now, in order to work in the top of that stitch also, you can see it back here behind your front post DC. Every stitch has a post and the V, the stitch that we can see that we're used to working in. So in order to work in the post and then work in that same DC again, we're going to go behind our post and work in that V that we're used to working in and work a DC. Alright, work 2 DCs in the next stitch. And then do that fancy front post DC again in the next stitch, and reach around back and front post DC in the top of that, or regular DC, excuse me, in that same stitch that we just put a front post in. 2 DC in the next stitch, just like a normal increase. Then around the next one, we front post DC, and then in that same stitch, DC. Okay, again, 2 DC in the next stitch, then front post DC, and then DC in the top of the stitch we just worked around the post. And then again, 2 DCs in the next stitch, and then around this last one, front post DC, and find the stitch that's on top, or that's directly behind our post, and work a DC in that stitch. Now we're going to slip stitch into the top of our chain 2, and you'll see we have the first 5 little lumps for our sand dollar all ready to go. Pretty cool, huh? So round 3, we're going to work chain 2 again, because we're going to do another DC round. DC in that same stitch again, and then DC in the next stitch, then we're going to work what I have called a front post cluster around the front post that we have created. So a front post cluster is just like a bobble stitch, but instead you're going to do it around the post. So you're going to yarn over, insert behind the post, pull up a loop, yarn over, and pull through 2. Yarn over, insert in that same place behind the post, pull up a loop, yarn over, and pull through 2. Yarn over, insert through that same spot again behind the post, pull up a loop, yarn over, and pull through 2. You'll have 4 loops on your hook now, so you yarn over and pull through all 4, and you'll have created a front post cluster stitch. Now we're going to do the same thing again that we did in the last round, and we're going to DC in the stitch directly behind our post. It's a lot easier to see when you've got this big old cluster behind it. So we're going to DC into that stitch. Now we're going to DC here, then 2 DC in the next stitch, and DC here. Now we're to another one of our front post DCs, so we're going to make another cluster. So yarn over, insert behind the post, pull up a loop, yarn over, and pull through 2. Yarn over, put it behind that same post again, pull up a loop, yarn over, and pull through 2. Yarn over, put it back through that same post one more time, pull up a loop, yarn over, and pull through 2, and then yarn over and pull through all 4 loops on the hook. Another cluster stitch. We're going to work a DC in the stitch that we just worked around the post. So the stitch that's just behind the cluster we just made. And then work a DC in the next stitch. You can see where we're going now. We've got some nice clusters all making our sand dollar textured. So we're going to do 2 DC in the next stitch. DC in the next stitch. And then we're going to make another cluster around this one. Oops. Yarn over and pull through all 4. I'm going to DC in the stitch directly behind our cluster, which is technically the same stitch. So when it says DC in same stitch, that's what it means. for those clusters, and then DC in the next stitch. All right, we're going to do it 2 more times. 2 DC, DC, cluster around the post, 2, 3, and pull through all 4. DC in the stitch that we just worked behind. There we go. And DC in the next stitch. Then we're going to work 2 DCs in this stitch, DC in the next stitch, and work a cluster, front post cluster around this post. 1, 2, 3, and pull through all 4. We're going to work in the top of that stitch we just worked around the post of, and then work a DC in the next stitch. Wow. And we are back to the beginning. So we're going to slip stitch in the top of our chain 2 to close her up. Now what you'll find is that the best way to get this to lay flat to put a beverage on is to kind of press all of the clusters to one side. So pick a direction and press them all in that direction, and then they will lay nice and flat to put something on. So round 4 is the treble round, and this is where we're going to add 4 little holes. So you know how a sand dollar has the spokes, and then on 4 of those spokes is a hole up above it, but not on the last spoke. So we're going to do a round of trebles in order to put our holes above our spokes. So for the treble round, we're going to chain 3, and that's going to count as a stitch. Then don't worry about, you don't have to treble in the same stitch like last time. We're going to go right into the first stitch like a normal treble. If you've never done a treble crochet before, you just yarn over twice, insert your hook where you want it to go, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. It's like a super tall DC. So in the next stitch, we're going to do an increase. So we're going to treble, yarn over, pull through 2, pull through 2, pull through 2. We're going to work 2 trebles in that stitch. Then we're going to chain 1 and skip our front post, our cluster stitch. We're going to skip this one. And instead we're going to treble into the one right after it. And that's going to create our hole. So we're going to do 2 trebles in the next stitch. Then work 1 treble in the next 2 stitches. And then work 2 trebles in the next stitch. Now we're back to where we need to chain 1 again. We're going to skip that stitch that we made our cluster and work a treble in the next one. Then work 2 trebles in the next stitch. and work 1 treble in the next 2 stitches. We're going to work 2 trebles in the next stitch. And then we're back to a place where we need to chain 1 again. So chain 1, skip over the cluster stitch, and treble in the next one. Two trebles into the next stitch. And work 1 treble in the next 2 stitches. Then 2 trebles in the next stitch. And we need 1 last hole. So we're going to chain 1, skip our stitch that has our cluster, and treble in the one right after. Work 2 trebles in the next stitch. Whoopsie doodle. Work a treble in the next 2 stitches. Now we're just going to work right over the top of this one without chaining 1, because we're going to work right into that stitch like a regular stitch, because we only need 4 holes. Because the sand dollar only has 4 holes. It doesn't have one on the top. So we're going to work 2 trebles into this next stitch, just like we usually do. But instead of chaining 1, we're just going to work a treble right into the top of that one. And a treble into the one after. And then work 2 trebles into the last stitch. And slip stitch in the top of our chain 3 to join it all together. Now, you are going to have things kind of curling up at this point, and that's totally okay. So that's going to scrunch together over the next couple of rounds. You'll see we have 4 nice holes on the bottoms where our sand dollar is coming together. So round 5 is an SC round. And we're just going to chain 1 and then work 2 SCs in this first stitch. And then work 2 SCs. Now we're going to work 2 SCs in the chain 1 space. And here's where it gets tricky. It's easy to miss this stitch here, but that is the top of this next treble. So you need to pay attention and make sure you don't skip that one while you're working. Otherwise your count will get all kinds of off. So you're going to do 3 stitches and then an SC increase. So 2 SCs in the next stitch and then 3 SCs. And 2 SCs in the chain space. Okay, don't forget that stitch right next to your chain space, even though it's easy to cover up. 1, 2, 3 SCs, 2 SCs in the next stitch, 1, 2, 3 SCs, 2 SCs in the chain 1 space. Don't forget this stitch you almost covered up with your increase. So 1, 2, 3 SCs, 2 SCs in the next stitch, 1, 2, 3 SCs, 2 SCs in the chain 1 space. Don't forget that stitch after the chain 1 space. 1, 2, 3 SCs in the next stitches, 2 SCs in the next stitch, 1, 2, 3 SCs, 2 SCs in the next stitch, 1, 2, 3 SCs. Now, for the sake of making this lay flat, we're going to add an extra stitch here. And it's not going to throw off our count because this is technically the last round before our border. So when it says 2 SC in the base of the chain 3, that's this stitch here that often gets left in the dust because it's got the chain coming out of it. We usually don't count it, but in this case we're going to go ahead and put an SC there. And then slip stitch into our first stitch, not into the chain. So there's the chain. We've slip stitched into the first stitch. So here's our sand dollar looking all purty, and he's all ready for our crab stitch border. This pattern is just full of funky stitches, isn't it? So our crab stitch border, crab stitch is one of those really fun ones, and once you get it down, you'll be really happy to have it in your arsenal. Crab stitch is also referred to as reverse single crochet, and it's going to actually work backwards. So instead of working from right to left, we're going to work from left to right. This is for right-handed crocheters. Obviously, you're just going to work in the opposite direction you usually do. So instead of putting the hook in our next stitch like we're used to putting it in, we're going to go backwards. Now don't count this stitch that our hook is already in, or else we'll just be undoing all the work that we've been doing. We're going to take our hook and working from front to back, and this is going to feel really weird. You might want to pull out an extra tail. Put your hook in front to back into the stitch you just worked through. Okay? Yarn over and pull it through that stitch, just like you always do. Then yarn over and pull through 2. You're going to get this funky, stacked on top of itself looking stitch. Okay? We're going to do it again. So I like to go kind of out and under my work. So we're going to go back into this stitch. We're going to go backwards to the previous stitch, grab our yarn and pull it through. Yarn over and pull through 2. We get that funky stacked on top of itself stitch again. Okay, I'm going to do it again. Through the previous stitch, yarn over, pull through 2. Okay, back through the previous stitch, yarn over and pull through 2. Now it helps if you pull these tight as you go. So see how we're getting this stitch that kind of leans off to the wrong direction? So there's our previous stitch again. I think it's easier to see when I turn it up this way. So put it through here, grab your yarn, yarn over and pull through 2. And it does feel kind of twisted, but that's the point. It gives it this real twisted top. Look at how cool that looks. So coming at it again from the underneath. Go through, grab your yarn and pull it back through, and pull it tight. All right, next stitch, pull it tight. Starting to get the rhythm. All right. Tuck backwards and under here. And pull. All right. See, we're getting it now. Insert your hook front to back. Grab your yarn, pull it through, and pull. Insert your hook from front to back, grab some yarn, yarn over, and pull. Pretty cool, right? So I'm just going to go ahead and do the rest of this and so that you can see it without all of my colorful commentary. All right, we're almost back around. Now what I like to do, because my first crab stitch is always a little uglier than the rest of them, what I like to do is crab stitch not only in that very last stitch there, but also in the top of my first crab stitch, because it just never quite looks right. Now, just like you would, you're going to do a crab stitch slip stitch, if you will. Just find a place to put your hook at the beginning and slip stitch backwards with your crab stitch and pull that tight. And then you can cut it off and bind it in, and you have a lovely little coaster. Check that out. And because of the crab stitch and because of the increased couple stitches we did on the SC round, it's going to lay nice and flat for you. Now you can skip the crab stitch and just leave it with the SC border on it. That's totally fine. I just like my crab stitch because it looks a little bit more finished, and I just fell in love with it after doing this project. So take pictures of all of your coasters. I would love to see them. Take pictures of them with beverages sitting on them or out on your picnic table, and make sure you post them to Instagram with @HookedByKatie or #HookedByKatie on them for a chance to have your stuff put in the newsletter. And I will see you next time on the next tutorial. Thanks. Bye.